Hey YNR fans! Welcome to YNR Trends, your young and the restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. Phyllis had been circling around suspicions for weeks, her sharp instincts refusing to quiet down even as those around her insisted that she was overthinking or letting her natural mistrust get the better of her. In Genoa City, few people were as naturally suspicious and driven by their gut as Phyllis, and that trait had both saved her and cost her dearly in the past. Yet when it came to the bizarre return of Cain, or more precisely the man pretending to be Cain, she felt the prickling of a mystery that refused to leave her alone. The man who presented himself as Cain Ashby seemed smooth, too smooth, and for all the familiarity he projected, there were subtle cracks in his performance that gnawed at her curiosity. It wasn't just that Cain had been absent and then resurfaced under questionable circumstances, it was that his sudden return coincided with a tangled web of accusations, particularly aimed at Chance Chancellor, who found himself increasingly cornered by suspicion. Whispers around town began to grow louder. Chance had been reckless, Chance had made mistakes, Chance had something to hide. But Phyllis knew Chance well enough to sense that this narrative wasn't adding up, and when she placed it side by side with the appearance of Cain, the threads began to weave themselves into a pattern. At first, Phyllis tried to push the thought aside because it sounded almost outrageous. Why would anyone impersonate Cain, and to what end? Yet the more she saw, the more she noticed oddities that no one else seemed to pick up on. The cadence of his speech didn't always match the Cain she remembered, the memories he recalled were oddly selective, and his interactions with certain figures in Genoa City seemed orchestrated, as though he were playing from a script rather than drawing from lived experience. Most troubling of all was how conveniently his presence aligned with the growing case against Chance. Whenever doubt about Chance started to fade, the Cain impersonator seemed to have a new detail, a new revelation, or a subtle reminder that kept suspicion alive. Phyllis, who thrived on connecting dots others overlooked, began to wonder if the so-called Cain had been planted deliberately to drive a wedge between Chance and those he needed most. Her suspicions deepened one night at society when she happened to overhear a heated conversation the impersonator thought was private. She caught only fragments, but they were enough to stir her instincts into overdrive. The word "set up," "keep him distracted," and "doesn't suspect" yet filtered through the air, and though she didn't catch the full context, it was unmistakably the voice of the Cain lookalike. When she confronted him directly later, he smoothly brushed it off as a misunderstanding, claiming she must have misheard and turning on the charm that once would have disarmed her. But Phyllis wasn't convinced. That moment solidified her determination. Something bigger was happening, and if no one else was willing to dig into it, she would. She started watching more carefully, playing her cards close to the vest. Phyllis was no stranger to deception herself, so she knew how to mask her growing awareness. Instead of challenging him outright, she began gathering little pieces of evidence. A forged document left too carelessly in his briefcase when he thought no one was looking. A phone call made under an alias that traced back to a burner number. The way he avoided certain people in town who would have known Cain intimately, instead choosing to surround himself with those who had more distant memories of him. Each detail on its own might have seemed minor, but when Phyllis connected them, they painted a disturbing picture. Meanwhile, Chance was finding himself in a more precarious situation than ever. Every attempt he made to defend himself seemed only to dig the hole deeper. Rumors of misconduct and betrayal swirled around him, and people who once trusted him began to waver. Devon, Abby, and even those within law enforcement circles were caught between loyalty and doubt, torn by the accumulating evidence that seemed to place Chance in the wrong. Phyllis could see the toll it was taking on him, his posture tighter, his voice tinged with frustration, his patience wearing thin. She knew he was a man under siege, and it angered her that almost no one else could see the strings being pulled behind the scenes. The real breakthrough came when Phyllis, digging into old connections, discovered a financial trail that the impersonator had overlooked. She had always been tech-savvy, skilled in uncovering secrets through digital breadcrumbs, and this time was no different. A series of transfers led back to accounts that had no business being linked to Cain Ashby. The names were false, the businesses shell corporations, but with enough persistence, Phyllis tied them back to a shadowy figure known for setting up elaborate cons. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a full-blown setup designed to take Chance down while using Kane's identity as a smokescreen. The impersonator was a hired gun, a manipulator skilled at playing roles, and his entire act was tailored to feed the suspicions surrounding Chance until the man was destroyed. Phyllis wrestled with what to do next. Charging forward with accusations without proof would only backfire. She knew better than anyone that people already thought she was too impulsive, too eager to see conspiracies. She needed hard evidence, something undeniable that would tear the mask off the impersonator and reveal his true identity. So she set a trap, quietly enlisting help from a reluctant ally who owed her a favor. The plan was simple: lure the Kane impostor into a corner where he'd slip up, record the conversation, and expose him for what he really was. Yet as with all plans in Genoa City, nothing stayed simple for long. The impersonator was clever, and he nearly turned the tables on her, forcing Phyllis to think faster, talk sharper, and dig deeper into her arsenal of tricks. But Phyllis was at her most alive in moments like these, when the stakes were high, when the danger was real, when the truth was dangling just out of reach but not beyond her grasp. When the breakthrough finally came, it was dramatic in the way only Genoa City confrontations could be. Phyllis cornered the impostor with Chance present, throwing out evidence like daggers until he had no room left to maneuver. The forged signatures, the false accounts, the overheard phone calls, all laid bare. At first, he tried to bluff, to laugh it off, to turn the accusation back on Phyllis. But her confidence, sharp and unyielding, shook him. Piece by piece, his facade cracked, and finally, in a moment of desperation, he lashed out, his words confirming what she had known all along: he wasn't Kane Ashby. He was a fraud, a pawn in a larger scheme to frame Chance and bring him down. For Phyllis, it was both vindication and warning. She had proven herself right, had saved Chance from ruin, but she also understood that the game was far from over. Whoever had orchestrated this plot was still out there, and the impersonator was just one layer of a much deeper conspiracy. The oppressive weight of the day seemed to settle directly onto Phyllis Summers' shoulders as she pushed open the heavy door to the Grand Phoenix's lobby, the usual vibrant energy of her own creation feeling muted and hostile. It had been another fruitless day, another series of conversations that circled the drain of her despair without offering any escape. Every path led back to the same, inescapable conclusion: she had attacked Chance Chancellor. The evidence was overwhelming, the witness accounts were damning, and the only person who believed in her innocence was the one staring back at her from the reflective surface of the polished brass elevator doors: herself, a woman whose credibility had been set on fire and stomped on so many times that even she sometimes questioned her own memories. The gnawing feeling, that persistent, irritating itch in the back of her mind that something was fundamentally wrong with the picture everyone was painting, was her only lifeline. It was a thread so fine it was nearly invisible, but she clung to it with the desperation of a woman who knew a prison cell was her most likely destination. Her heels clicked a lonely, rhythmic tattoo against the marble floor as she made her way to her office, the sound echoing in the unnerving quiet. She needed a moment of solitude, a fortress away from the pitying glances and the not-so-subtle accusations. Sinking into her desk chair, she let out a long, shaky breath, her eyes falling closed. But instead of the peace she sought, her mind became a chaotic cinema of the past weeks, replaying every moment, every word, every seemingly insignificant detail surrounding that terrible night. She saw the blur of the assailant, the glint of something metallic under the poor lighting of the alley, the heavy, distinctive shape of the cane as it swung through the air. She had replayed this memory 1,000 times, each viewing a fresh torture. But this time, something was different. The exhaustion had stripped away her frantic energy, leaving behind a strange, hyper-focused clarity. It was as if her subconscious had been working on the problem all along, and now, in the quiet of her office, it was ready to present its findings. The image of the cane solidified in her mind's eye. It wasn't just any cane, it was an heirloom, a piece of Genoa City history, as much a part of the Chancellor family as the mansion itself. It had weight, a certain balance, a specific sound it made when it struck the ground, a solid, authoritative thump. Phyllis had been close to it, had seen it in Chance's hand on numerous occasions. On the night of the attack, the memory was a jumble of fear and pain, but the cane was the central, terrifying object. She remembered the way it had been wielded, not just as a bludgeon, but with a certain flourish. A flick of the wrist on the backswing. It was a subtle thing, a nuance that her brain had catalogued but her conscious mind had until now ignored. And that's when the first crack appeared in the narrative. The person who attacked her in Chance moved with a savage, desperate strength, but the handling of the cane, it was practiced. Almost elegant. It was a disconnect that she couldn't quite articulate, but it felt vitally important. Driven by this new, nebulous thought, she turned to her computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a woman possessed. She pulled up every piece of security footage she could access from the areas surrounding the athletic club that night. Most of it was useless, grainy, dark, offering glimpses of shadows and blurred figures. She had been through it all before with the police, who had pointed to a particular figure, clad in dark clothing, leaning heavily on a cane, as the nail in her coffin. But now, she wasn't looking for the cane itself, she was looking for the person attached to it. She zoomed in, enhancing the poor quality images until they pixelated into abstraction. She watched the way the figure walked. The limp was pronounced, consistent with someone who genuinely needed the cane for support. But again, that feeling nagged at her. There was a rhythm to the limp, a synchronization with the cane's placement that seemed off. It was too perfect, too consistent. A real injury, she reasoned, especially under the stress of committing a violent crime, would have moments of faltering, of unevenness. This limp was like a metronome. Frustrated, she leaned back, rubbing her temples. She was seeing things, grasping at straws. This was what desperation looked like. She was about to shut the computer down when she remembered something Danny had said to her weeks ago, a throwaway comment he'd made when trying to cheer her up. He'd talked about an old movie they'd seen together, a crime thriller where the villain used a disguise that included a fake limp to throw off the police. It had seemed irrelevant at the time, but now it echoed in her mind. A fake limp. Could it be that simple? Was someone performing the role of a cane user? Her heart began to beat a little faster, a dull thud against her ribs. She opened a new browser tab and began a deep dive into a topic she knew nothing about, the biomechanics of walking with a cane, the subtle differences between a true physical reliance and a feigned impairment. She spent the next hour consumed by medical journals and physical therapy videos, her focus absolute. She learned about weight distribution, about the slight hesitation before stepping with the injured leg, about the way the shoulder dips. The figure in the footage, she realized with a growing, cold certainty, was doing an excellent impression, but it was an impression nonetheless. The cane was a prop. This revelation was seismic, but it was still circumstantial, a theory built on feeling and observation that would never hold up in court or with Christine Williams. She needed more. Who would go to such lengths? Who would want to frame her and destroy Chance? The list was short, but every name on it seemed implausible. Her mind turned to her own recent actions, her complicated, often toxic relationships. She thought about Diane, about Jack, about Jeremy Stark's lingering shadow. But this felt different. This was meticulous, patient. This was personal against Chance as much as it was against her. Chance. The new district attorney, the golden boy determined to clean up the city. He had made enemies, powerful ones, but who would be this brazen? Her thoughts then drifted to the cane itself. It was Chance's. How did the impersonator get it? The attack had happened at the athletic club, a place Chance frequented. Could the cane have been stolen from his locker? Or was there another explanation? A darker thought began to form. What if the cane wasn't stolen? What if it was a copy? The idea sent a fresh jolt through her. A copy. It was audacious, but it made a terrifying kind of sense. It would explain how the real cane was found in her possession, planted, of course, while the impersonator used a duplicate. But who would have the resources, the knowledge, to create a perfect replica of such a distinctive object? It would require access either to the original to study it, or to detailed photographs. Her mind raced, sifting through faces, through motives. And then, a memory surfaced, so ordinary she had nearly forgotten it. Weeks before the attack, there had been a charity event at the Chancellor Mansion. She had been there, navigating the crowd, and she had seen Chance, holding court near the fireplace, the cane leaning against his chair. She remembered now, with startling clarity, someone else admiring the cane, picking it up, examining the silver handle with an intensity that had struck her as odd even then. It was a fleeting moment, lost in the whirl of the evening. The person had commented on the craftsmanship, running their fingers over the intricate engraving. At the time, Phyllis had thought it was merely polite interest. Now, it felt like something else entirely. Like reconnaissance. The face that coalesced in her memory was one she would never have suspected. It was someone close, someone trusted. The realization was so shocking, so utterly disorienting, that she actually gasped aloud, her hand flying to her mouth. The pieces, which had been scattered and meaningless, suddenly flew together, clicking into place with a sound that was almost audible. The motive, the opportunity, the access. It all fit. The fake limp was a performance, but it was a performance designed to hide a different physicality altogether. The strength in the attack, the height, the build, it all aligned once she adjusted for the deception. This person had been in the background all along, offering false sympathy, subtly stoking the flames of suspicion against her, all while holding the key to her freedom. The anger that washed over her was so pure, so white-hot, it stole her breath. This wasn't just a frame-up, it was a betrayal of the deepest order, a calculated act of psychological warfare designed to dismantle two lives simultaneously. But knowing and proving were two very different things. She couldn't go to the police with a theory based on a gut feeling and a remembered glance at a party. She needed evidence, something concrete and undeniable. She stood up, pacing the length of her office, her mind working at a fever pitch. She had to be careful. If this person suspected she was onto them, they would disappear deeper into their facade, or worse, escalate their plans. She needed to catch them in the act, to find the duplicate cane, to uncover the proof of their deception. She thought about their patterns, their habits. Where would they hide such an object? It couldn't be in their home, that would be too risky. It had to be somewhere accessible but private. A storage unit? An office? The thought of breaking and entering sent a thrill of fear and adrenaline through her, but she knew, with a chilling finality, that it was the only way. The law had failed her. Her friends had their doubts. She was alone in this, and she would have to become the thing people always accused her of being: reckless, cunning, and dangerous. The following days were a masterclass in suppressed tension. Phyllis moved through her life like a ghost, playing the part of the defeated, desperate woman, all the while observing her target with an intensity she had to carefully conceal. She noted their comings and goings, their routines, the tiny, almost imperceptible cracks in their carefully constructed armor. She saw the flicker of satisfaction in their eyes when her name was mentioned in connection with the crime. She heard the false notes of concern in their voice when they asked how she was holding up. Every interaction was a lie, a dance on a knife's edge, and Phyllis had never been a more skilled performer. She enlisted help from the most unlikely of allies, someone who owed her nothing but who understood the sting of injustice, a conversation held in hushed tones, a bargain struck out of mutual need for truth. Together, they began to piece together a plan, a way to expose the impersonator that would leave no room for denial. The plan was set for a quiet, rainy evening, the kind of night where secrets felt safest. The city was draped in a fog that muffled sound and blurred outlines, a perfect backdrop for revelation. Phyllis's heart was a wild drum in her chest as she positioned herself, hidden from view, her phone recording, its camera a silent witness to what she prayed would be the end of her nightmare. The wait was agony, each second stretching into an eternity. Doubts assailed her. What if she was wrong? What if this final, desperate gamble only succeeded in burying her deeper? But then, the sound she was waiting for echoed in the silence, a key turning in a lock, a door creaking open. A figure emerged from the gloom, moving with a purpose that was at odds with the late hour. They went directly to a disguised panel in the wall, a hiding place so clever Phyllis would never have found it on her own. With a soft click, the panel opened. The figure reached inside and pulled out the object that had haunted Phyllis's dreams, a cane, its silver handle gleaming dully in the faint light. But it wasn't Chance's cane. This one, though identical in almost every way, had a tiny, almost invisible mark near the base, a flaw the impersonator had unknowingly created during its fabrication. It was the duplicate. In that moment, as the figure held the cane, their body relaxing from its performed limp into its natural posture, the disguise fell away completely. There was no longer any doubt. Phyllis had her proof. But she didn't move. She waited, her breath caught in her throat, as the figure, unaware of the eyes upon them, began to speak softly into a phone. The words were low, but Phyllis heard them clearly, each one a confirmation of every suspicion. They were talking to an accomplice, outlining the next phase of the plan, a phase that involved ensuring Chance's credibility was permanently destroyed, tying up the final loose end that was Phyllis Summers. The cold, clinical tone, the utter lack of remorse, was more chilling than any outburst of rage could have been. This was not a crime of passion, it was a strategic, cold-blooded execution of a long-held grudge. The motive, laid bare in that whispered conversation, was a twisted web of past grievances, jealousy, and a thirst for a power that Chance represented and they felt denied.